All right, everybody. It says I'm live, so as usual, please let me know if you can hear me and see me, preferably both. But welcome to another Monday night. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff that's going on relevant to preparedness and just go over why we need to prepare for some of these possibilities to exist here in the future. Good seeing everyone. So we've got Grisio Nemo saying 9 by 19. Can't go wrong with that. We've got Tom Reed here. Carrie S. 556 by 45. C-Line is asking for a drum roll. Whatever a lol is, I'm not sure. Dave Sickles, good evening to you as well. So, thank you all so much for being here. Harbor Prepper says 17 by 76. We've got a lot of interesting numbers. The 5 by 5 is kind of just falling from grace, apparently. So, Exile Reviews, you got my back on that one. Thank you so much. And Exile Reviews and Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you for being here and modding. I really appreciate it. So, I also want to mention that if you're here on the replay, thanks for checking everything out after the fact. And we hope you can make it live, but I understand why this late night chat doesn't always work for everybody else. Now, tonight is about how the Trojan horse is already here, right? The SHTF disaster is already in America. And it is obviously in many ways, and there's a lot of different perspectives and different points of view that you could take a look at this from and say, okay, of course, there's a lot of different facets to why America is already infiltrated in one form or another. But we're going to specifically focus on the threat from China specifically, okay? So I'm going to say specifically more than once tonight, apparently, but what I'm trying to say is that right now, with everything going on the world stage, your first assumption would be that Russia is the most likely adversary to present a real threat at this point in time because they're currently engaged in an active conflict with a nation that we are currently supporting. Whether or not you want to say that they're being supported by NATO or just the United States directly, they're being supported by those of us who would be involved in a hot conflict with Russia if they so chose to move forward in that way. But with everything that's happening, with the fact that our economy is tumbling the way it is currently, and the fact that the world is kind of teetering on the edge of dumping the US dollar and trying to form some kind of new conglomerate that might be able to, let's just say, position themselves into a place of power while we move forward in this weird shift that we're all experiencing right now. Well, in my opinion, this is just where I stand as of right now, I still consider China to be our biggest threat, especially regarding the fact that we know there is escalation and aggression regarding Taiwan, and that there's been a lot of talk about us backing Taiwan and defending Taiwan. And of course, we have strike fleets and all kinds of other naval activity over in that region. So there's a lot of reasons to believe, in my opinion, that China is actually a bigger threat to us currently than Russia. Is Russia more likely to maybe use a nuclear device sooner than China would? I would say possibly, because of the way that the conflict is going over there and the fact that a tactical nuclear weapon could be used at any point in time. However, China is positioning itself to be able to do a lot more damage than what Russia could do to us right now unless they went full-scale nuclear attack. So we're going to talk about why all that is true and why you should be mostly concerned with them over this other threat from Russia currently, okay? And this is just my opinion, but the evidence is there, and that's what we're going to review tonight. And this is why we need to prepare for many, many different things. And something I want everyone to keep in mind is that if we find ourselves in conflict with China, if we find ourselves backing Taiwan, and even if we're not directly in conflict with China, but we're fighting another proxy war with another nuclear superpower, well, I would expect it to affect our supply chain drastically, very quickly. And things that we're used to having access to that are affordable would suddenly disappear. And one thing you'll have to keep in mind is that during the food shortages, during the empty shelves crisis, and during especially 2020 when there was a lot of panic buying going on, the things that ran out first were budget friendly. Anything that was affordable was gone first, right? We covered that quite a bit on this channel, but it's true. Things that were affordable disappeared first because it's what people could get the most of for their money. And then the things that were left over were generally name brand, higher end, less generic items. So where did all these generic non-name brand things come from? They come from China. So there's going to be a huge disruption in that regard, which in its own will create chaos and panic here in the United States. Not to mention everything else related to kinetic fifth generation style warfare that we could easily experience very soon thereafter. So let's get started tonight. There's a lot going on. I will say hello to some people. I see POTB is here. We got Tampa Twin as well. Viv B is here too. So just like to say hello to everyone once in a while, because I really do appreciate all the support, and I appreciate all of you being here and trying to be involved with the preparedness community and trying to be aware of things that are actually happening. And this is like your weekly roundup for things to pay attention to. Well, tonight might not be as broad in the sense of trying to touch base on every little indicator that exists out there, but it's still very good information for you to consider and to be aware of, okay? First and foremost, I want to talk about something that is related to China, but also mostly related to things here at home. And we need to be very concerned about this Restrict Act that they are trying to push through legislation right now. And it's something that you should be aware of, okay? The Restrict Act is basically a response to the TikTok situation, right? So we all know that there's this whole push to ban TikTok because it's a Chinese spying application that can mine data and who knows what else, right? So there's all that argument that's being had around TikTok itself. But the problem is that the Restrict Act isn't specifically targeting TikTok. In fact, it goes much deeper into being able to regulate social media and the internet as a whole and tell Americans what they can or cannot consume. And that is a huge problem because it's very similar to what we already have going on in places like China based on their internet firewall. So I implore you to research and do some studying surrounding the Restrict Act, because I can easily use it to come after channels like mine in order to say that I am, bypassing certain, let's just say, gatekeeping style protocols that they want to try to control in the sense of what type of information is put out there, who has access to it, and whether or not you're able to consume it in a way that they find to be fit, right? All these things can occur, and not to mention it also limits things like being able to download apps, and even if you use a VPN, which is how a lot of people in China get around having access to certain apps right now. Here in the United States, if this Restrict Act were to go through, they'd be able to fine you, punish you, possibly even imprison you for using things like VPNs to get around some of their firewall protocols. So this is something that is very dangerous in the sense of overreaching authoritarianism. It's very Orwellian, and we should be much more aware of it than we are, because it's being pushed as a TikTok ban because of the dangers of TikTok and how it basically puts Chinese spying applications inside your home, right? But it goes much further than that, and it's a lot more dangerous in regards to information being regulated on the internet and how we consume it, how we communicate around it, and how we facilitate people accessing information that's not being put out by mainstream media, right? And the thing you have to consider is right now with what's going on with these leaks, the Pentagon leaks, right, that are coming originally from the source of like a Discord server, well, understand that these are the types of applications that they're able to regulate if this goes through. So there's a lot more to it. I very simply try to explain it there in layman's terms, but basically this is almost like a Trojan horse, right? We're talking about that tonight, but this is like a Trojan horse bill that sounds good on the outside if you're concerned about foreign adversaries spying on us through social media apps, but in reality, it gives the government way too much control and way too much power over what we're able to access and able to consume on the internet. So these are just things that I think you should be concerned about. I think you should also be aware of it, because clearly you're here on social media, you're watching YouTube right this second, which means that you're involved in this community and what some might consider part of like the fringe information community, right? Like we talk about things that aren't talked about specifically on the mainstream media, which is threatening to those who want to control the message, right? So all these things need to be well vetted. And I think that we have a bill here that's very dangerous for moving forward in the future. I don't like the looks of it. I don't necessarily like TikTok in general. I don't currently operate a TikTok account or anything along those lines. But what I will say is that the solution can always end up being the problem, right? And sometimes the solution that sounds great at first turns into something much worse than the original problem that it was created to diagnose. So make sure you're aware of it, and I would implore you to contact your representatives and let them know that you're against the idea of the Restrict Act, because it's just too overreaching, okay? Now, what else can we do, all right? Well, we can talk about all the stuff going on surrounding the fact that China is a Trojan horse that's already here in this country, and the things that are being revealed right now regarding a lot of the information surrounding, well, some of the leaks that were put out, as well as some of the things that we can look back on from, recent history to kind of get an idea as to why this is such a concern and why you should be aware of just how close to home this threat can really suddenly become, okay? So, I saw some chatter in the chat earlier about some of the migrations coming from South America and everything like that, that will be covered, I guarantee you. So, Exile Reviews, I don't need to make a TikTok dance video because I'm already in the Urban Preppers Fanny Pack video, which I did a dance for. So, I'm just putting that out there. Anyway, you know, CJ Bowen, MP, that thumping sound you're hearing is the Black Ops helicopter with men in black fatigues coming for you. Well, you know what? They'd be able to sneak up pretty easily because I got a lot of air activity out here due to my proximity to Minot Air Force Base and the fact that, you know, there's just been a lot more air traffic this past 6 months than what I've seen while being here before. So, just how I feel about it. Anyway, and I will say, just so everyone's aware, I just kind of keep an eye on this. I have some good people here in my network and in my community locally, right? And one of my community members let me know today that there was like an extremely large amount of activity going on around some of the silos in the area, and that it was just out of the norm. And yes, we know about Operation Global Thunder. We know that there are these different training drills and everything else happening. There are some weird things related to timing based on that, and in the fact that the person I'm talking to here has lived there their whole life and have never seen this level of activity before. So I honestly believe we are on a high alert status in many, many ways. Of course we are, right? Because of everything that's happening. But my concern is with China more so than Russia. So when we think nuclear, maybe we're more concerned about the possibility of some kind of inside job or possibly an EMP, right? Let's talk about why, okay? Here we are. We're going to talk about, well, some of the information that was provided to us by these leaked documents surrounding the balloons, right? So everyone knows about the spy balloon. We knew what happened during that whole little fiasco, okay? Well, according to these leaked documents, there were up to 4 additional Chinese spy balloons that were noted by U.S. intelligence, reported the Washington Post, citing a recent trove of leaked classified Pentagon documents. Now, the Washington Post, at least from my understanding, was somewhat integral in finding the leaker, right? Which I'm not really a big fan of the press working with the government to find whistleblowers, which you might be able to call them. That sounds counterintuitive to me if your job is journalism and you want to expose things that the government's hiding, right? But instead, now they're working with the government to find these people who, in the past, have been praised for releasing this information because it did reveal some things that we as the American public weren't aware of. And although it might have national security risks involved, that the information's already out there, now it's too late for that to necessarily matter. There's a lot of interesting things to think about in that regard. But anyway, here's the information that we're being given, at least at this point, which, by the way, could easily be misdirection. So keep that in mind anytime you're digesting this information. This all could, like, seriously, I'm just going to say this right now before we get into the meat and potatoes of this live stream, but everything I'm about to tell you is from sources other than myself, right? Because I'm not boots on the ground witnessing these things myself. So everything has to be looked at in between the lines, right? We have to read between the lines to make sure that we're being given the correct information and that we're also not buying into some sort of morale-boosting propaganda that pushes people towards the idea of wanting to enter a conflict with a certain nation, right? So keep all of that in mind because 100% that's still a possibility. Never discount that fact. Questions still linger on the true capabilities of the one that flew over the continental United States in January and February, according to previously unreported top-secret intelligence documents. A spy balloon that attracted national attention when it traversed U.S. airspace earlier this year was one of at least 3 other balloons documented by the United States. Another balloon flew over a U.S. carrier strike group in an unreported incident. The third crashed in the South China Sea, a top-secret document obtained by the Washington Post stated. It is not clear when the other events occurred. The Chinese spy balloon that flew over the United States this year, called Kylene 23 by U.S. intelligence agencies, carried a raft of sensors and antennas the U.S. government still had not identified more than a week after shooting it down, according to a document allegedly leaked to a Discord chat room by Jack Texera, a member of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, reported the Washington Post. Okay, then they talk about that guy. A day, oh wait, hold on, here we go. We're just going to get back to the balloon thing because that's actually what we're concerned about here. 2 other balloons were referred to as Bolger 21 and Accardo 21 in another document. Bolger 21 carried surveillance equipment and was reportedly in the air from December 2021 until May 2022, a National Geospatial Intelligence Agency document said. The other balloon carried similar equipment and a foil-lined gimbaled sensor. The balloons are named after notorious criminals in an alphabetical order. The documents also detailed a lack of strong senior oversight of the balloon surveillance program, according to the report. Okay? Law of the minimum, thank you, I appreciate it, and you're welcome for the patch. If you guys don't know, if you want to join the Subscribe Star, it's $5 a month. You get a morale patch. You also get involved in community networking and exclusive content, and not to mention the fact that there are preparedness incentives every month, and this month is actually an EcoFlow unit. So I'm doing my best to give back where I can. Not every month is going to be like that big of a preparedness incentive, but that's the incentive for that month, and it just goes to one Subscribe Star member who we're all going to kind of decide on maybe is most worthy of it, because it is not any sort of, you understand what I'm trying to say. Moving on from there. The other balloon, oh, we already did that. The documents also detailed a lack of strong senior oversight of the balloon surveillance program. The United States in February accused China of flying a spy balloon in its airspace, setting off a political row in Washington, blah, 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 blah. We all know what happened there. But what we're being told now is that there was actually more balloons and that we had more information about what those balloons were capable of than what the public was aware of at the time. And that these balloons are clearly nefarious and intentional. And they are gathering data on different aspects of our military, as well as who knows what else, most likely our infrastructure in many ways. By the way, the sensors and everything else related to what these balloons are capable of can have alternative, let's just say, possible actions, right? They don't have to only be for surveillance. There's a lot of other ways to militarize surveillance equipment, right? And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because the balloon incident was a big deal, and we were told something that was other than what these documents that were leaked have to say. And so that's something for us to keep in mind, not to mention the fact that Bees Nuts is here, so good to see you. And I just want everyone to be aware of the fact that those balloons are only secondary to what's already here in the country. But we should be aware of the fact that these things are happening. So, can I say that one more time? All right, so what else is going on? Well, remember how I talked about the fact that there are secret police stations here in the United States that are ran by the Chinese government? Well, we have a couple examples of that actually now. From the time that I set up this live stream to talk about this information to actually going live, another example of it popped up, so I thought that was very interesting. But first off, the FBI issues alert about dangerous Chinese agents in New Jersey, okay? It sounds like something out of a Jason Bourne movie, but it's real, and it's increasingly happening in New Jersey, which is, it's New Jersey, you know, what do you do? But the FBI has issued an alert that People's Republic of China security agents are illegally harassing, stalking, terrorizing, and trying to bribe individuals in the Garden State. Jim Dennehy, the special agent in charge, I don't know where the C went on that, but in charge of the FBI in New Jersey, says that most of the time the end game of these Chinese security agents is to bring people back to China in order to basically shut them up and to have them pay for criticizing the Chinese government. Okay? Who they're going after. So the Chinese will frequently target political and human rights activists, dissidents, journalists, political opponents, and various religious groups, either with their own agents who enter the U.S. under false pretenses, or they may try to hire people who live here to do their dirty work. There's an effort called Fox Hunt that they have where they focus on financial crimes of these individuals, and sometimes those financial crimes are just trumped up charges, he said. He said Chinese agents will use a variety of techniques to intimidate their targets. Sometimes they show up at their front doors, sometimes it's harassing phone calls, and the FBI is working with a lot of our local and state partners as a way of combating this, okay? He said other times they will go to an individual's home with firearms in order to intimidate and harass these victims, and they're hiding in their own homes under couches because they don't want to be seen or be actually kidnapped. I don't know who wrote this. Maybe that's a direct quote. Dennehy noted these agents will also go after the children of Chinese immigrants, and sometimes it's others who might do business in China and have criticisms of the Chinese government or what have you. Really, they're targeting just anybody who criticizes the regime. I hope they don't come after me. He said occasionally the Chinese will hire private investigators here in Jersey who might be unwittingly able to help surveil or to monitor or even to be part of the harassment campaign against these victims, okay? This is happening in New Jersey. And then just today, we got a report about something similar happening in New York, okay? Like I said, just today, April 17th. 2 New York residents allegedly ran secret Chinese police stations. Significant national security matter, okay? The FBI and federal prosecutors announced Monday the arrest of 2 New York residents who allegedly ran an undisclosed Chinese government police station in Manhattan's Chinatown neighborhood. Now, we've reported on this quite a few times, but this is real time happening right now that these people are being found out and actually apprehended. Liu Jianwang and Chen Jinping have been charged with conspiring to act as agents of China's government, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. Breon Peace, the U.S. Attorney for that office, said China's Ministry of Public Security has repeatedly and flagrantly violated our nation's sovereignty, including by opening and operating a police station in the middle of New York City. How is this being allowed? I think that's a good question to ask. 2 miles from our office, just across the Brooklyn Bridge, this nondescript office building in the heart of bustling Chinatown in Lower Manhattan has a dark secret. Until several months ago, an entire floor of this building hosted an undeclared police station of the Chinese National Police. Now, just imagine the NYPD opening an undeclared secret police station in Beijing. It would be unthinkable, right? So, this is happening now. And this is why I want everyone to be aware of how much this Trojan horse has already infiltrated the country. This is a huge concern. There's a lot happening right now to point towards evidence that this is the real threat, okay? And look, does Russia pose a threat? Of course they do. If NATO ends up in a hot conflict with Russia, publicly, like on paper, then the United States will be dragged into it, and then Russia will have who knows what going on here stateside, because China clearly has the ability to do whatever they want here, at least when it comes to opening undisclosed secret police stations in the middle of New York City, of all places. How much easier would it be for them to operate those types of places in rural environments, in small towns, where people aren't really checking in to see what's happening in those types of areas as often, right? There's a lot of different things you have to consider when it comes to this. Although we feel safe in our rural areas, if you don't live in the metropolitan environment, well, you also have to remember that in quiet towns, things stay quiet. So they are targeted when it comes to needing to lay low very often. And just as a reminder, if you don't keep some of these small details in your mind of things that have happened in the past. A long time ago, there was that training camp, I believe in New Mexico, where they're training child soldiers to be able to do the unthinkable. So the things happen in this country in those rural areas that we don't know about because no one really knows what's happening there, right? So keep that in mind, just in case you think you're safe living in the country. It might be the best place for them to be also. And just so you're aware, in places like Northern California, where you have a lot of grow operations where people are trying to, get involved with that, well, there was a huge presence of Chinese nationals in the forests in Northern California also involved with that. So these things happen, all right? Gregor Zamina, that new mic is on point, bro. I am glad you're saying that because I was hoping it was worth the investment, and I think it was because I did watch the replay from last week, and I was like, you know what? That audio is a lot better. So something to be said, this is a Blue Yeti. So, I mean, I just went for it. I said, I guess everybody was probably right about, they should just get one of those. Let's see. Sergeant Rudy 0311... and whatever the rest says, Smith 31B Rhett. Okay, there was a big camp in Greenville, South Carolina, too. Exactly, they're everywhere. It's not always in the major cities. You have to keep that in mind. It's sometimes easier for them to make mistakes in major cities because there's so many people around that there's a witness almost always, right? Okay, now, what else is happening? In case you're not aware, a huge migration of Chinese nationals has been coming in through our southern border, okay? Now, this story is kind of the story of a singular Chinese migrant who illegally made his way into the United States, okay? Now, the thing about this story is that it is written in a way to kind of show the hardships and the reasons behind why they made the difficult decision to flee their home country and illegally try to make it into the United States. But I don't think that necessarily tells the whole story as to why some of these things are happening. But what we can get from this is some information about how they're accomplishing this journey. And then we can actually talk about evidence why this journey might be used for more than just escaping a very authoritarian regime. Okay, so let's see here. On a crowded speedboat making a night crossing in rough waters off Colombia in January, Daniel Hong, a former Shanghai fitness trainer, began to regret his decision to try to enter the U.S. via Latin America. He was soaked through by crashing waves, Mr. Hong is a part of a huge upsurge of Chinese under Xi Jinping's rule who have risked arrest, drowning, and robbery as they pass through some 8 nations to reach the southern U.S. border, following in the footsteps of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans and Cubans and others. I can no longer see hope in China, he said. If there was any other way, who would be willing to leave their family? Who would be willing to leave their family as a 18-year-old man. The Chinese migrants making dangerous treks through Latin America are a subset of the larger outflow of Chinese of all wealth levels. Under Mr. Xi, the private sector has been squeezed, forcing layoffs and driving away entrepreneurs. Others worry political repression will only get more suffocating as Mr. Xi embarks on his third term in power, okay? Now, let's talk about how they're getting this job done, or how they're getting here, okay? So that's important to me, and I think it should be important to you as well. But we also need to talk about the numbers, because that's where the red alarms start going off, okay? The United Nations Refugee Agency counted 116,868 Chinese seeking asylum around the world at a point measured in mid-2022, up from 15,362 at the end of 2012. So in 10 years, the amount of asylum seekers from China went up tenfold, okay? It's quite a bit, all right? Now, in the first 3 months of this year, 3,855 Chinese migrants crossed the Darian Gap. We'll talk about the Darian Gap here in a minute because I also think it's an important point to keep in mind. The 60 miles or so of treacherous terrain connecting South and Central America. That compares with 2005 for the full year in 2022. So that number is already up 1,000 over last year by just April of this year, okay? Now, well, actually first 3 months, so March, okay? Here's the thing. Apprehensions of Chinese along the southwest border by U.S. Border Patrol. Notice the graft. The graft. It's not a graph anymore. It's a graft. We're going to be fixing things using skin from other places, apparently, all right? Let's just not look too deep into that one. This graph shows a huge uptick in those U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions, okay? Now we also have the Chinese nationals crossing the Darien Gap. This is a huge uptick. This is not from, a standard average amount to like, a 20% increase. This is a huge increase, okay? Now, here's the thing. I'm going to try to get here to where we can see his travel and how he got there, okay? All right, here's how he did it, just so you guys know how this is going. And here's the thing that I really want you to keep in mind. When we get illegal border crossings from South America and Central America and Mexico, right? They walk up to the United States or possibly drive or take buses, right? But it's all done on land. It's ground, right? To do that from China requires a lot more resources, okay? And for the uptick to be as high as it is, for these people to have this ability to do this so fluidly and have these resources is where my alarm bells start to go off to say, I think there's more to this than just a lot of people wanting to leave, because the amount of planning, the logistics, and the cost of doing this trek is a lot harder and a lot more expensive than just walking up from Mexico like we see Mexican immigrants do on a regular basis, right? So, he obtained a visa to Turkey, lied to Chinese border officials that he was going there to survey restaurants and was allowed to go abroad for the first time. In Istanbul, Mr. Hong sold his iPhone 13 and bought an outdated model that he thought wouldn't attract robbers on the road. From there, he flew to Ecuador, the only country along the Latin America route that lets Chinese enter without a visa. So he made it from China to Turkey and now to Ecuador, okay? This is not a typical illegal immigration. I'm just going to throw that out there, okay? And I have met people who have crossed the southern border illegally, and I am bilingual to a certain extent in the sense of being able to speak Spanish, and I can tell you that their stories are not anything like this. Very often, one of the stories I was told was, how did you cross the border? I went up to the border crossing, and I went to the side that was coming into Mexico, and I walked backwards while everyone else was walking forwards so that it looked like I was still walking forwards. That is the type of thing that those people are doing, right? Of course, there's lots of other ways. I'm just saying that was an anecdotal story that was told to me at one point in time. Okay, this person has flown to 2 different countries out of their country already at this point, all right? Once he arrives in Ecuador, what happens? He arrived in Quito in late January. He and other Chinese people on the flight added each other on messaging apps to keep in touch on the journey. Mr. Wang and a Chinese man from the flight paid a smuggler to help them cross into Colombia by car. Now they're in Colombia, okay? But there, men who said they were Colombian immigration officials picked them up and extorted them and took all their money, okay? Whatever, all that stuff happens. He had money stuffed in his sneaker, $100 bills that he had hidden. It was enough to get him to Necoclí, Colombia by taxi, the last stop before the Darien Gap, okay? All right, migrants prepare for the Darien crossing. It's flashlights, purification pill. It's a hiking trip, a dangerous one at that. So this is definitely a very dangerous place. But basically, the rest of the story is that this guy goes through the Darian Gap, takes like a van up through Mexico, through like the most dangerous highway in Mexico, barely makes it, finds asylum in the United States, and is now petitioning for asylum and is now here. Okay, here's a map. You have the Darian Gap down here. You have the rest of Mexico and Guatemala and the traverse path that he had to take through Central America. But understand that this is a very resource heavy, well planned out, logistically driven process. This is not just, hey, we just need to get to America and start walking north. This took multiple flights, boat travel. It took multiple bribes and all kinds of things to get up here. Now, some might argue, well, that's just how bad these people want to leave China, okay? And there might be a lot of people who are under that situation, okay? Understandably so. I wouldn't want to be there either in that sense. But this takes a lot of resources, okay? Here's something you need to understand about the Darian Gap, all right? And I'm trying my best to kind of go through this while keep an eye on the chat, but I'm heated right now, and I just want to kind of really pay attention to this because I think it's very important, okay? Crossing the Darian Gap, a lawless jungle dividing the Pan-American Highway, okay? Here's the Darian Gap. It's a portion of jungle that connects South America and Central America, basically, where the Pan-American Highway is actually broken up because it's all protected forest there. And the Pan-American Highway goes all the way from, I think, the tip of Chile all the way up to Alaska. So generally, it can take you all the way there, but this one spot is very dangerous and hard to travel, and it does not have any road, okay? So people are going through the Darian Gap. It's a lawless highway. People die there. It's very dangerous. It's very excruciating. And here's the thing. It's lawless, so you could get whatever you want through there, basically. Okay? And so if you were to try to sneak a large number of people through a certain part of South America to get into Central America, the Darian Gap is exactly where you would do it, right? And you could probably get a lot of things pushed through there that might not be seen by anyone from the outside. So honestly, like, this whole story here just kind of talks about how dangerous it is, what happens if you have to take it. There's robberies, there's assaults, everything that you would not want to have to experience, but people find that risk worth it in order to get to the United States eventually, basically, right? But these people are flying to multiple different countries. They're going to Turkey and then all the way to Ecuador, so that they have to then cross through the Darian Gap, as if there wouldn't be a better route to maybe at least get into Panama or something, right? But apparently this is the best way to do it. Just putting it out there, okay? Now, here is a video that's kind of circulating on Twitter to show these lines of Chinese nationals, generally mostly male, waiting to cross into Panama, or actually in Panama, trying to cross through to get through the rest of Central America and Mexico to get to the United States. Now, can I say for sure that these people are involved with some kind of a military operation? Of course not. I can't verify any of that information. But these are the things that I want you to really pay attention to. And then someone over here, James Hutton, actually made a really good point. We have to ask ourselves, who is financing this mass migration? Central Americans simply walk to the border. Chinese legal immigrants have to travel thousands of miles overseas, right? And that's exactly what my thought process was as well when looking into this stuff, because that trek that Mr. Huang took from China to get to the most dangerous part of Central America, basically, when it comes to trying to walk on foot across borders, just doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I mean, it might be the only way. I don't know, but man, that takes a lot of resources and planning, okay? So, they have lots of videos like this circling right now. It is something that you need to be aware of, and we need to very much so pay attention to the fact that even if a small percentage of these people are related to some sort of military operation or have some sort of nefarious plans, or once they embed themselves in the United States, that small percent can do a lot of harm because of the fact that they are now here rather than somewhere else, rather than outside. You can always do more damage from within. Look at the government, right? And the list goes on. When I say that, I mean the one that I'm on. Welcome to my life. Chinese PLA grade. They look too fit to be asylum seekers. Well, a lot of people were contradicting that, in the comments to those videos, saying like, these are just regular people. What are you talking about? And okay, China's got 1.6 billion people, so oh wow, a few thousand of them are trying to get into America. What's the big deal, right? Well, that's the thing. It's an opportunity, okay, and it's an opportunity that logistically takes a lot of planning, a lot of resources, and also doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense based on the fact that you would think there'd be a better way, a more direct way that wouldn't require traveling all the way to Turkey, all the way to Ecuador, and then trying to get to the most dangerous part of the journey rather than starting somewhere that's more reasonable. And look, I don't know how all that works, so maybe that is the only possible way, but that's a hard sell, okay? Anyway, yeah, Gregor Zamina brings up the fishing vessels that are ignoring international water, right? Well, that's also true. There are 17,000 fishing vessels that are illegally fishing in other countries' waters all the time. So there's another reason for why you should be paying attention to all these people coming up suddenly from South America. Now, let's see here. I want to also talk about why we need to be concerned about some of this stuff and stuff that's happening here in the United States already that could be a positioning move. And when I say positioning, I mean how they're putting things in place and how they're structuring right now in order to basically flip the switch when that time comes, and why these things are starting to add up slowly over time. And man, if there's one country on the planet that knows how to do attrition, it's China, right? And especially because they control so much when it comes to economics, they can play the attrition game for as long as they need to, right? And unfortunately for you and I, our economy is not strong right now, which means we can't stand up to that economic attrition for a very long period of time without taking some major suffering along with it. And ask yourself this question right now, and I'm just trying to get some thought going, right? I want you to provoke some critical thinking, but how much of the US population would be willing to suffer in order to avoid some sort of economic disruption due to our relationship with China? I think you'd be surprised by how many people would just say, just let China do the thing. I just need a cheap iPhone and I want to go back to eating Hot Pockets and chilling in my apartment, right? You would be very surprised, I think. Now, let's go ahead and get in the chat here for just a second. Prepare to Thrive. Have you heard about the secret Chinese police station in New York? We actually discussed that earlier in the live stream. So if you get to go back on the replay, you can see how not only did I discuss that, but they also were picking up the same type of behavior in New Jersey, which was a story that I reviewed before the New York thing even came out. So these things are happening in real time right now, and they're not even being correlated quite yet in the media. So these are things that we definitely need to pay attention to, but I'm glad that you are bringing it up anyway, because in case someone wasn't aware of it or joined the chat later, it is something they should be aware of. Yes, the Chinese have secret police stations here in the United States. One just got busted in New York City, of all places, which means they can have them anywhere at all. And what I did say in that earliest part of the conversation was they could have them in rural environments just as easily as giant urban areas, because it'd be probably easier to hide it for longer, okay? Now, Slumdog, what does 5x5 mean? It means that everything sounds good and clear, okay? It's basically radio talk for you're good to go, everything's coming through clear. Basically, okay? I know my ham guys in the chat will correct me if I'm wrong on that, so. All right, and I am taking my ham prep course. I am working on that. I will have a ham license here soon. I definitely been dragging my feet on that, but it was an uncomfortable piece of tech that I'm just not familiar with at all. So I'm starting from the ground up with that. Like, okay, I understand how a radio works, but once you get into the entire conversation surrounding, getting your ham radio license, you learn a lot that you had no idea about, and it's definitely a rabbit hole that I am suddenly diving down. So just be aware of that. Now, of course, I'm learning on a lot of Chinese radios, although I do have an ICOM, which is Japanese, so at least I have something going for me in that direction. Let's see. Florida Sheepdog is more concerned about the anti-American citizens that are here rather than the incoming threat. And I understand that, but I will also mention this to you, is that a lot of the anti-American citizens are being influenced by China. And you would be surprised by how much funding of theirs goes into some of these organizations that spread that type of anti-American sentiment, okay? So they are part, and I've discussed this in a previous video, but they're definitely part of a disruption campaign. Their entire goal is to create chaos and disrupt our daily lives and make it so that it's impossible to implement some kind of security or control system when things really do go hot. And understand that the more chaos and disruption that occurs here, the better off it is for China. Regardless of whether or not we find ourselves in a hot kinetic conflict, our country in chaos means their country can move forward unmolested in whatever it is that they want to do, aka, reclaim Taiwan. Who knows what else, right? Look at their road initiative going on in Africa right now. I mean, they're trying to take over the world. Like, quite literally, China is Pinky in the brain. Even though, if you wanted to really turn that into an analogy, China is the brain, and who's in charge of our country right now is more like Pinky. So I'm just going to say it because it's just true. I don't care how you vote. You can't look at what we're doing right now and have any kind of pride in that department. That's just my opinion. I don't care. So, and you know what? It doesn't mean I apply that to anyone who is acting in that way, regardless of what political party they're with, because there's definitely people on both sides of the aisle that I dislike heavily. Moving forward, what else is China up to? Well, here's something that came out, let's see, in 2022. So I like to go back sometimes to remind everybody as to why some of these things are such a concern, because if you separate these stories apart, it can sound like, why are you so worked up about it? Or why are you so worried about that? It's not a big deal, like people do this all the time. But when you connect every little piece of the puzzle together and you can see the full picture, you say, oh, wait a second, this is probably dangerous. So back in 2022, and yes, this is CNN, so they know a lot about China. In fact, they're probably best friends. But CNN exclusive. FBI investigation determined Chinese-made Huawei equipment could disrupt U.S. nuclear arsenal communications. What? Do you think that anything on those balloons could possibly disrupt U.S. nuclear arsenal communications? A lot of what people were concerned about was like interception of data, right? Like, oh, they're intercepting our encrypted data. Oh, they're trying to get information about our silos. They're trying to get military intelligence, right? What about the fact that they could just be disruptors, right? It's not hard to create interference. In fact, it's easier to create interference than it is to intercept encrypted data and then unencrypt it. So keep in mind that all those possibilities are on the table. Okay. On paper, it looked like a fantastic deal. In 2017, the Chinese government was offering to spend $100 million to build an ornate Chinese garden at the National Arboretum. I wanted to say Arboretorium just because it felt better. Arboretum in Washington, D.C., complete with temples, pavilions, and a 70-foot white pagoda. Keep that pagoda in mind. The project thrilled local officials who hoped it would attract thousands of tourists every year. Yes, your local officials' number one goal is to generate income for the town or for the city or for the municipality, and so they will take anyone's money, and they'll take whatever might generate money, because that's actually the number one goal. So always keep that in mind as well as to why these things are allowed to happen, okay? But when U.S. counterintelligence officials began digging into the details, they found numerous red flags. The pagoda, they noted, would have been strategically placed on one of the highest points in Washington, D.C., just 2 miles from the U.S. Capitol, a perfect spot for signals intelligence collection. Multiple sources familiar with the episode told CNN. Also alarming was that Chinese officials wanted to build the pagoda with materials shipped in the U.S. Or to the U.S. in diplomatic pouches, which U.S. customs officials would be barred from examining. Federal officials quietly killed the project before construction was underway. The Wall Street Journal first reported about the security concerns in 2018. The canceled garden is part of a frenzy of counterintelligence activity by the FBI and other federal agencies focused on what career U.S. security officials say has been a dramatic escalation of Chinese espionage on U.S. soil over the past decade. Okay? Now, and look, this thing goes all the way into all kinds of stuff regarding that exact thing, okay? But here's the thing, okay? All right, real quick. Among the most alarming things the FBI uncovered pertains to Chinese-made Huawei equipment atop cell towers near U.S. military bases in the rural Midwest. According to multiple sources familiar with the matter, the FBI determined the equipment was capable of capturing and disrupting highly restricted Defense Department communications, including those used by U.S. Strategic Command, which oversees a country's nuclear weapons. Oh, okay. Well, why does that matter? Why do we care? So they stopped it. Great. They stopped the Washington, D.C. project. But what else has been happening? Now, I do need to mention, channel's biggest supporter is Midway USA. Biggest supporter of the channel, and I mean that. Like, they literally have moved me forward in my preparedness and are allowing me to do a lot more when it comes to gear and just resources to be able to do more. And that's exactly what I was trying to accomplish this year in this channel, was to be able to do more. So a big thank you to Midway USA for making that possible. And look, not every company of that stature is like, yeah, just do a live stream and talk about whatever you talk about, and yeah, we'll be cool with that, right? I mean, that's pretty legit, if you ask me, because it would be very risky to do that. But they have confidence that I'm up here just speaking the truth the best I can. So I appreciate them for having that confidence in me. I really do, and I appreciate them for being involved with the preparedness community. So big thank you to them. Now, if you don't know, and Florida Sheepdog says it's not a spy tower, it's art. Viv B also wanted to bring up the whole Gaddafi thing, how he wanted to start a gold-backed standard around the world, basically, when it came to currency. And then suddenly he was no longer fit to rule Libya, and now he's gone. Okay? And yes, I think there's definitely some things to consider there. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Gaddafi, although he was a strong man when it came to the way he ran his government, some parts of the world might require a strong arm to keep law and order. And once he was removed, Libya did not really have law and order anymore, now did they? And of course, they did not have any of the economic growth or any of the quality of life that they were experiencing under Gaddafi's rule. So sometimes the alternative's not always better. And I think you could ask a lot of people around the entire world, especially regimes that may have been replaced by countries like the United States, whether or not they're better off now than they were before. So keep that in mind. Always good to bring that up. Thank you, Viv B. Appreciate it. Now, why are we talking about this Hawaii equipment thing? Why are we talking about the fact that they could disrupt and intercept communications from U.S. Strategic Command, right? The people who control our nuclear arsenal? Well, don't forget, they're buying farmland. Where is farmland? Generally in flyover nation. Generally in places near military bases. Why? Because they usually build bases further away from population centers for multiple reasons. But here's what I want you to keep in mind, okay? Here's an issue many people might not be aware of, but it's something I've been looking at closely in Congress, okay? And this is from Ralph Norman, serving the 5th District of South Carolina, and this is from 2022. China owns and controls almost 192,000 acres of farmland right here in the United States. To be clear, it's not a huge percentage of our total farm acreage by any stretch. According to the FDA, there are more than 35 million acres of farmland in the U.S. which are owned by foreign investors. It's also true that investors from several other countries like Canada, Germany, and Italy own significantly larger amounts of farmland than China, okay? And that is true, but we're going to talk about that here in a second for why that doesn't matter. But however, there are two things that make Chinese ownership in our farmland particularly concerning. First, foreign investors from China are under the total and absolute control of the Communist Chinese government. And second, that the government has become increasingly hostile towards America. Okay? I agree with that. But here's the real takeaway here. This is from 2022, August, so like not even that long ago. China owns and controls almost 192,000 acres of farmland. Okay? Now, let's go over here to now. Okay? This is from March 1st, 2023, so more recent, okay? China owns roughly 384,000 acres of U.S. agricultural land. What? I thought it was like 192,000. Yeah, well, you know, in 7 months, they now own 384,000. Oh, so literally doubled it in 7 months. During all of this crisis going on with Taiwan and the United States, they doubled the amount of farmland that they own in the United States. Okay. No, that seems reasonable. Oh, and by the way, in this article, they let you know that it's not really a big deal, though, because China is actually number 13, I believe. No, number 18 as to who owns the most farmland in the United States. However, the proximity to where their farmland is located to military bases is concerning. And the other countries that own all this farmland, generally not a concern. Canada, Netherlands, Italy, UK, Germany, Portugal, France, Denmark, Luxembourg, Ireland. I don't see Iran, North Korea, Iraq, Russia. I'm not seeing any of those names. So sure, other countries own a lot more, but they're not problematic countries. Most of them are NATO countries, right? Canada owns the most. Oh no, like that's not a concern. The concern is that China, who is a foreign adversary that we might be in a hot war with here at any moment based on the Taiwan situation, owns a ton of farmland, and it's in proximity to all these different military installations, which is why the concern should be there. As you saw with the Hawaii situation in Washington, D.C., for why they had to say, no, you're not building that temple, they literally could have put a interception device in that pagoda that was 70 feet tall and been 2 miles away from the U.S. Capitol, right? So, I wanted to mention that. Concern about Chinese purchases of U.S. agricultural land increased in late January when the China-based Fufeng Group was prevented from building a corn mill on land close to a North Dakota Air Force base after officials called it a security risk. Why would it be a security risk if it's just the 18th country in the sense of owning land in the United States? Why isn't Italy a security risk, right? So you see how this is going. And so it's interesting that all these news sites are like, it's not really a big deal, but, they did have to cancel that project because of the Air Force. Okay, so how is that all turning out? Well, here's something I do want to say. And I've talked about this before, but I wanted to mention it again. I appreciate living in the state of North Dakota where, from my experience, now I don't live in Fargo and I don't live in some of the more urbanized areas, but what I will say is that most North Dakotans I've met and become acquaintanced with, are pretty patriotic Americans. Like, these are pretty solid, hard-working people out here, you know what I mean? So, I'm just going to say it, because, that's been my experience. And, I lived in Florida, I've lived in California, now I live in North Dakota. I have some experience with different types of people, I guess you would say. And out here, we're not, eating alligator and human faces, so I can say it's at least a lot different than Florida. Anyway, Dana Sands sat slumped in his chair an hour into the Grand Forks City Council meeting on February 6th with his tie strewn to the side. Sand, the president of the City Council, looked fatigued and even slightly annoyed as an unusually packed crowd of onlookers cheered on Jody Carlson, a local resident. All right? God bless America, Carlson started when she took the podium during the public comment period of the meeting. You're a bunch of fighters, she said, pointing back to her supporters in the audience. That night, Sand and members of the city council were set to vote on whether or not to approve a proposal from the Fufeng Group, a Chinese agricultural conglomerate that sought to build a wet corn milling plant on the outskirts of the city. And this is where I was talking about earlier, how they'll do whatever it takes to get money. Watch this, okay? Wet corn milling plants process corn into several profitable products, including corn oil, starch, fructose, and animal feed. But Carlson and other critics had a long list of complaints about the proposed plant, including concerns that it would raise property taxes and create traffic congestion. They also objected to the city annexing land from local property owners. Tensions surrounding the project had become so heated that last July that the FBI even visited Carlson's home over a post she made on Facebook allegedly calling for Grand Forks citizens to overthrow the local government. You sold us out to China, Carlson said at the city council meeting. Our city is in a terrible condition right now because of the failure of many of you to act in the best interest of the people. I mean, hey, anyway, Sand, meanwhile, has spent much of the past year trying to get the $700 million Fufeng project built, arguing that it represented a unique economic boost to the small Midwestern city. North Dakota produces 380 million bushels of corn per year, and the plant, which was projected to process 25 million bushels per year, was expected to add an estimated $90 million in wages to the economy and boost the value of local corn farms by $60 per acre. But that evening, as Carlson took the stand, Sand knew he had to vote against it, okay? Just a few days earlier, on January 27th, Andrew Hunter, an assistant secretary of the U.S. Air Force, had written a letter to the North Dakota Senator John Hoeven, a Republican, saying that Fufeng's project represented a significant threat to national security because of its proximity to a local Air Force base. Grand Forks Air Force Base is 12 miles from the proposed site. Given the potential for the Fufeng plant to be used as a center for Chinese state espionage efforts, he wrote, the Air Force's opposition to the project was unambiguous. Okay? So, understand, not only did North Dakota come together and say, no, we're not doing that, but the Air Force literally said, we don't want none, okay? This is happening. They're buying land. They're strategically placing themselves in places where they need to be. Now, how close are we to a actual conflict with China? This is something that we need to definitely be aware of as well. And I do want to mention, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Growing with Hudson. Hey, Magic Prepper and chat. Well, good to see you. Glad you're here. Jimmy of the Sea. Audio is definitely fixed. I am very glad to hear that because I spent money to fix it. So it's always nice when you spend money and it actually fixes the problem. Like, wow, sometimes we luck out, right? Now, let's see. I'm trying to jump in here for a second. And, well, and Tampa Tom Fishing has hairy legs, so everyone needs to know that as well. Florida Sheepdog 1 says Hunter is taking up farming. Well, it is what it is, I guess. But here we are. Now, how would we know if we were about to be in a conflict with China? How would we know China was about to invade Taiwan? Well, this is from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And this is something I want you to be aware of because a lot of these steps are already being taken, which should tell you the proximity of this possible conflict is becoming closer and closer, okay? Because that matters. Like if we know when this might happen, the amount of disruption it's going to cause here in the United States is going to be very difficult, okay? It's very stress-inducing. Panic buying is going to happen. People are going to freak out, and suddenly everything's going to be very expensive. Limited supplies of everything made in China is suddenly going to be a reality, right? Just keep that in mind, okay? So, how do we know how close we are to this actually happening? And understand that with all these pieces being strategically placed in the United States already, if we go to a hot conflict with China over Taiwan, there's a good chance we're going to experience some things here on our soil, even if they aren't necessarily attributed directly to the Chinese military, right? They might be considered domestic problems that are happening suddenly, and we can't really necessarily pinpoint who's conducting these attacks, but we know they're happening, right? We also know there's reason to believe a lot of that stuff's happening right now, even before this hot kinetic conflict. But how will we know when this is going to happen? And then when I tell you that, I'll also tell you how some of these things are happening that they're going to say are indicators of this conflict, okay? Finally, many of the understandings, military factors, and ambiguous positions that enabled decades of peace, prosperity, and democracy on Taiwan are now eroding due to China's burgeoning economic and military power. Taiwan's consolidating democracy, led by pro-independence Democratic Progressive Party, and burgeoning U.S. determination to play the Taiwan card in a strategic rivalry with China. If China has actually decided to go to war with Taiwan, and per President Joe Biden's recent gas with the United States, in 18 or 24 months, how would we know? For one, it would almost certainly not be subtle, and at least to the U.S. intelligence community, and probably not to Taiwan and other Western observers. Modern war between great powers consumes huge stocks of key munitions, especially precision-guided ones for high-intensity naval, air, and amphibious warfare. So China would have already started surging production of ballistic and cruise missiles, anti-air-to-air, large rockets for long-range beach bombardment, and numerous other items at least a year before D-Day. Now, we can't prove that that's happening right this second, but I can tell you that they're definitely producing all of that stuff. And China, knowing that this is an indicator, might be hiding its production. It's not very hard to do when you have a country the size of China with the population the size that they have. They can easily be producing these things in secret, no problem at all. So keep that in mind. But there's some overt things happening too that will show us that this conflict is getting closer and closer. All right. Commercial imagery used by non-government analysts has identified new military facilities and weapons in China, including what appears to be new silo fields for its expanding nuclear armed force of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Major production by China of key munitions would be noticed by international government and non-government observers alike. I guess, but possibly well hidden, okay? China would also take visible steps to insulate its economy, military, and key industries from disruptions and sanctions. Easily say a lot of that's already happened. We had the trade war with China over the last few years, and they were easily able to adapt for those sanctions or levies, basically, that were being placed on their products through trade. They were able to adapt to that very easily and sidestep it, and in many ways maintain their profitability, right? So this would go beyond its current industrial policies and dual circulation strategy, which collectively aim to achieve technological and material self-sufficiency, or even its limited measures against increasing U.S. use of export controls, sanctions, and economic financial pressure. Also, sanctions clearly didn't affect Russia. So don't for a second think that China is going to be concerned about sanctions, right? Because, everyone's sanctioned Russia, and Russia's still doing Russia. And I have zero doubts that China cares less about sanctions than anyone else on the planet, because their economy is not dependent on anyone else. We're dependent on them, which is a terrible thing to have to say, but it's true, okay? Now, It would also include a surge of stockpiling emergency supplies such as medicine or key technology inputs, a suspension of key exports such as critical minerals, refined petroleum products or food, measures to reduce demand or ration key goods, especially imports such as oil and gas, and prioritization or redirection of key inputs for military production. Chinese elites and high priority workers would also face international travel restrictions. And China's leaders probably would be preparing their people psychologically for the costs of war, austerity, tens of thousands of combat deaths and civilian deaths from the U.S., and Taiwan launched strikes for a conflict that would begin in 2024. As some observers in the United States have predicted, such measures would likely be happening now. Okay? And they are not, despite recent heightened tensions. And they are not, according to this article. But strangely enough, we have other news reports contradicting that information. And don't forget that things like them reducing their demand on key goods, such as imports like oil and gas, well, who's been making deals with Russia recently in order to get more oil and gas, right? All these things are actually being put into place. But here's a big one that should be a huge red flag for all of you as to how close we're getting to this conflict to actually occur, okay? China expands military draft to veterans and students. This came out on April 16th. This is new information. Beijing says it wants to see more high-caliber soldiers in the ranks of the People's Liberation Army. China revised its conscription policy this week, saying that people with military experience along with college students will be on top of military draft lists if the country enters a war. The changes, prepared by the State Council and the Central Military Commission, aim to provide institutional guarantees for consolidating national defense and building strong armed forces, the government said in a statement on Wednesday, okay? The new rules, which take effect on May 1st, will help the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, with recruiting more high-caliber soldiers and improving the efficiency of the conscription system, the statement said. The Chinese military's newspaper, PLA Daily, noted that prioritizing the recruitment of skilled veterans would allow the army to rapidly develop its combat capability in the event of conflict, okay? So they are putting these things into place. This is happening. We are being made aware of the fact that they are strategically getting ready to expand their military might at a moment's notice, okay? And they're relying on college students because of their age and their physical or physicality, right? And military veterans who are already trained and have the experience. So, this is happening. Now, here's a little thing to keep in mind. And this is just something a lot of people bring up on a regular basis, but I want to bring it up again because I think it's important, okay? And I do appreciate all of you hanging out tonight. These chats are so valuable, not just for me, but in the sense of helping me like really wrap my head around some of this information and hopefully sharing it with all of you. I think that we have a really good community here, and I think that every week getting together to get this information out helps all of us stay on the same page. So I find it to be valuable, and it really helps me stay on top of what's happening, which helps me hopefully share relevant information with everybody that is looking for it, okay? So, let's see. Any suggestion on if someone hacking your phone or roommates helping by breaking cords charger? You know what? I have no suggestion on that, to be honest with you. So I wish I had, but I don't have any. I'm just going to be honest. All right. Oh, and I guess I just shared a comment from Six Gun Miller. So there you go. Not sure why. All right. So let's talk about what's going on here. Well, you know how everyone's concerned about like Chinese-made electronics and stuff if we do go into a war with China? Keep this in mind because Taiwan matters in regards to what we will do in the sense of military presence in that region if they were to be invaded. Well, keep this in mind. There are calls for greater safeguards in Taiwan after at least one device used by the military for its missiles was sent for repair in China. What? An optical instrument used for launch measurements for Taiwan's Hussein Fang 3 anti-ship missiles was shipped to its manufacturer in Europe. It was then sent back to Taiwan from Shandong province in eastern China, Taiwanese media reported. Last year, Beijing intensified military activity around the island. So, to break it down really quickly, Taiwan sent some of its military equipment back to its manufacturer for repair. Its manufacturer sent it back to Taiwan. Somehow it made its way into China. Excuse me. And China then sent it back to Taiwan. So, would China intentionally tamper with military equipment in order to defeat it during a confrontation? I think that's a reasonable question to ask, and I think that Taiwan is very concerned about it. Taiwan is very concerned about it for many reasons. Taiwan needs to be more strict and careful in its contract management, he said. Of course, we would not want such equipment to be sent to China for repair. Oh, well, here's something for you to really consider and why we should be more concerned with China's capabilities if we were to enter a war with them, okay? It's very easy to pass the threats that exist out there off because, well, we're the greatest military on the planet, so no one can really mess with us, so there's nothing to worry about. But the longer you believe that, and the longer your adversaries have to catch up, the less and less it becomes true. And now we're in a situation where we've allowed China to manufacture a lot of our military hardware for many, 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 many years, okay? The U.S. military's greatest weakness, China builds a huge chunk of it, okay? And I believe this article, I don't see the timestamp, but this is not a new article. This is just information that was out there. Made in China is a label Americans see every day on everything from clothes to televisions. But when it comes to America's weapons, made in China is a label you don't want to see. Despite political, military, and trade tensions between America and China, Chinese or Chinese-owned firms play a dangerously large role in U.S. defense production, according to a new Pentagon report. For instance, most U.S. military solid rocket engines use a substance called dechlorane. However, there is no domestic supplier for this material. The sole source is Occidental Chemical in Belgium, warns the Department of Defense's FY fiscal year 2016 annual industrial capabilities report. Even more concerning is that the precursor to make dechlorane came from China. The Chinese source can no longer produce that precursor, and so there is now no source for dechlorane in the world. Okay? Another example is how America's war machine runs on advanced electronics, most of which are made abroad. 90% of the world's printed circuit boards are manufactured in Asia, and more than half in China. This is a consequence partly as a result of China's determined effort to build up a domestic research and manufacturing base for their own advanced technologies. Meanwhile, China's direct investment in American companies topped $64 billion between 1990 and 2015. While this lags behind Europe and Japan, it does give Beijing a sizable stake in the U.S. economy and industries. As if the prospect of American weapons being dependent on Chinese-made parts is bad enough, there are already worries that Chinese-made electronics may be infected with computer viruses that would let China spy on or disable U.S. military, commercial, and consumer products. All these concerns will only feed ammunition to President Trump and others who advocate a get-tough trade policy with China and other nations. But this toughness may be more smoke than fire. Short of nationalizing American defense contractors, the U.S. will depend on private industry to satisfy its military production needs. And private industry, or their Wall Street shareholders, will insist on minimizing costs and maximizing profits. It's true. That's the essence of globalization and the impetus for the relentless outsourcing of American manufacturing. That's why Chinese goods have so captured so much of the U.S. market, not because they are good, but because they are cheap, which keeps American manufacturers and consumers happy. Made in America makes great sense in terms of national security, but American taxpayers will have to be willing to pay extra for made in Seattle instead of made in Shanghai. Finally, one of the last and biggest concerns is whether it is even possible anymore to make purely American weapons anymore. I didn't write this. As with the U.S. food supply system, it gets harder every year to be sure of where products really originate from. The Pentagon tries to save money by buying commercial off-the-shelf technology instead of custom-made gear, but the commercial sector relies on Chinese-made components, especially electronics. Eventually, these questions will need to be answered as the military grapples with how to maintain both security and keep down costs. The fact remains that while made in China may be a danger for U.S. national security, transforming into a made in America will not be cheap or easy. And there you have it. It's a national security concern because China makes a lot of our military equipment or has components within it. And Chinese components are within almost all electronics, even the made in America stuff. I'm telling you guys, right now, I used to run a business that sold made in America only. And no matter what we did, the one problematic part of our business was flashlights. Because even brands like Surefire still have to use components that are imported from overseas very often. And it's not because they don't want to make their entire product in America. It's because it's sometimes the only place to get some of these products, especially when you want to talk about like Cree LED bulbs and things of that nature. So understand that they have infiltrated every aspect of our lives when it comes to anything electronic. Made in the USA, purely made in the USA electronics are very rare and hard to come by at this point in time. And even ones that are like let's just say like Trigicon, for example, they still may have some sensors or circuit boards or LEDs or whatever it might be that they have imported. But because of the percentage of the product that is made in the USA, they might still meet compliance with being able to say that it's made in the USA. But these are just things you need to consider, okay? And I'm not trying to say that Trojacon uses a bunch of Chinese stuff. It was just an example of an American-made electronics company that still might have to outsource some of their components regardless of what their labeling says. So these are just things that are part of the problem. Everything has some kind of Chinese component in it. That's just what it is, okay? And I just need you to understand that right now the focus is on Russia. The focus is on Ukraine. The focus is on the collapse of our cities, right? Societal decay, urban decay. Our cities are falling apart. They're becoming lawless quagmires of chaos and destruction and crime. I mean, you couldn't pay me to live in a city at this point, which is generally why people live in them, to make more money than you can anywhere else. So that would not be a trade-off I would accept anymore. And I feel like a lot of people probably just shouldn't either. But I understand if you're stuck in a city, it's not the easiest thing to just get up and leave. But things are getting dangerous every single day. And people don't care about other people's well-being anymore. So a lot of the chaos and a lot of the division is already sown. And China, in many ways, has already accomplished a lot of their goals when it comes to the mission of destabilizing the United States. What's next? I don't know, but I'm telling you, they're already here. They own land. They've got people. They have espionage devices and stations. They have all the electronic infiltration. It's all already here. And just like with the Trojan horse, they're just waiting on the signal to pop out and surprise everybody, right? So our biggest threat here on American soil right now, in my opinion, is related to China. More so than Russia, and more so than any other foreign adversary or outside influence, North Korea and Iran included. But the anti-American sentiment and the instigators that are here in this country right now that we see involved with rioting and all kinds of other things like that, a lot of those are influenced by China or money provided by China or organizations that are subservient to China, right? There's a lot going on right now related to them. So I decided it was very important for us to focus specifically on that this week, just so you're aware of just how much there is at stake when it comes to that adversary wanting to have their grip on what we have here in this nation, okay? So, let's see. DM, old radios from the 1980s, all transistor and Japanese transistors or USA made. Good point. And those old tube radios are definitely, they're cool. I like them. They still work very often. They're easier to repair in many ways because you just replace parts, right? More so kind of like an old vehicle. It's much easier to replace a carburetor than it is to deal with an onboard computer system that is causing your fuel injection system to misfire, right? Like there's all kinds of things that you can look at when it comes to older technology being more simplified and easier to restore, maintain, and also trust during these types of situations. But Yardbird says, cities aren't dangerous, I'm dangerous. I'm glad that you're here and you're one of us, you know. Oki Khan says made in the USA usually just means put together here. Well, you do have the difference between made in the USA and assembled in the USA, but regardless, like compliance doesn't mean 100% always, right? So that's just what I was trying to put out there. Let's see. We also have Morse Venture Channel says, what kind of coffee do I drink? I'm all over the place. I will drink good old-fashioned just Folgers coffee. I will drink Invader coffee if I want to get fancy. I will drink instant coffee if I want to feel like it will be during the apocalypse. There's all types of coffee in my diet. And honestly, all I really want is coffee. Doesn't matter. It could be terrible coffee and I still want it. Maybe I have a problem. I don't know. But thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This has been a very good conversation. I hope it gave you some information to work with. I hope it gave you some things to think about. And I just want to try to remove that facade and that falsehood that we're immune to anything here on United States soil, okay? People often have this idea in their head that, like, well, nothing's going to happen here, so I don't have to really worry too much about X, Y, or Z. And I don't agree with that. I think a lot can happen here. And I think that we are underestimating our enemy at every turn if we don't assume that things can literally happen here in the United States, not just other places, right? Like, our concern is generally, oh, I hope we don't have to send soldiers overseas. But I'm telling you, there's already people here that we have to be worried about. So keep that in mind. Hopefully all of you have some plans in place. Hopefully all of you are somewhat squared away. And without anything else to say about it, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.